Let's get right into it. I started by building the two frames for the speaker compartments. The rest of the cabinet is built around this. These are just 1x2 walnut boards which I am gluing up, which I then clamped and left it to dry overnight. Next up, I cut the plywood with my table saw and circular saw. The cabinet has two layers. The interior, for which I'm using the walnut plywood, and the exterior, which I built out of birch plywood. I have all the measurements and cut list and step-by-step plans, which you can find on my website, and I will add a link to that in the description below. Now a little story while I'm cutting the plywood. This project was actually in process for 10 months. I designed it, I built it, but then there were a few things about it that didn't work out, which we will get into later, but I completely scrapped it and started from scratch again. Don't worry, I wasn't using walnut at that time, but this time I decided to use walnut. I mean, look at that gorgeous grain. Let's get back to the 1x2 frames I built. I measured and marked the center of each of the sides and used a Forstner bit to drill holes to fit rare earth magnets. The holes are deep enough that only a 1/4 inch of material is left and the magnets work through the wood. I used a strong glue to attach the magnets. The first time around, I actually made these on the 4 corners, but then I realized that it didn't quite work out very well because of the thick fabric on the speaker covers. Oh, and as I was adding the magnets, I had to make sure that I put them all in the same orientation. Another lesson I learned last time. Now let's build a cabinet. I made pocket holes in the walnut plywood as needed. And of course, the plans will guide you through exactly where all these holes need to be. First, I attach the speaker base to the frame. This is where the speakers will sit. Next, I put together the other two sides and attach that to the speaker base. As you can see, the magnets are now on the inside of the cabinet, which is why they had to be added before building the cabinet. I used lots of clamps and constantly checked for square to make sure everything was perfectly aligned and made 2 of these speaker compartments. Then I went ahead and attached the rest of the plywood to build the middle compartments and finally attached the second speaker compartment. This completes the interior of the cabinet. Now for the exterior shell. I made pocket holes on both ends of the plywood that is going to be the outer base of the cabinet. I attached that using wood glue and pocket hole screws on both ends. And then I added a bunch of finished nails in the middle where it came in contact with the walnut plywood. This is when the cabinet starts to get really heavy. Now it's time for the top and the sides. I set my saw blade at 45 degrees to make beveled cuts for both the top and the sides. But before attaching them, I applied edge banding to the exposed walnut plywood edges on the front and on the top. On second thoughts, this is something that I should have probably done before assembling for a more seamless finish, but most of it is going to be hidden by the door anyway. The middle has the top door that sits flush with the 2 sides when it's closed. It also needs to be able to stay open and supported when it is in use. I used lid support hinges for these and used a jig to make the holes for them. I will add a link to these in the description below. The hinges needed to be mortised into the lid so that the lid is flush when it's closed. Mortising the hinges in is pretty easy with a chisel and hammer, but you do want to make sure not to go too deep because otherwise the screws will stick out on the other side. These hinges and lid is where I had a lot of problems the first time around. It took me a while to find the right lid support hinges that would work for this situation, especially because the lid is pretty heavy. I went ahead and temporarily attached the lid before attaching the sides using just a couple of screws on each hinge. I added this before the sides so I could align the sides and trim them to fit perfectly if needed. This actually was the main reason why I had to scrap my first build. I had attached everything before attaching the lid, and I couldn't get the front to be aligned, and things were just out of whack. But this time around, I started with the lid and made sure the other two sides lined up as well with the edges and the fronts, so everything worked perfectly. Once I was happy with everything, I just went ahead and aligned the sides and attached them with wood glue and a bunch of finish nails. I love how the bevel makes these corners look so nice and clean. Now for the trim. I beveled the edges of 1x2 pine boards on my table saw to attach. For this guy, we're gonna start the measurement from this corner all the way to here. That's the measurement, and that's the inside corner, and then we have the 45-degree this way. The beveled notch of the plywood was in the way of the trim, so I cut that off with a flush trim saw. And then I attached the trim with wood glue and finish nails. The trim instantly gave the entire console a much more finished look. I also attached the trim to the lid, which will overhang onto the middle compartment. Then I filled all the nail holes, sort of chamfered the edges with my screwdriver, and got ready to paint. I taped off all the walnut plywood very carefully because I didn't want any paint to get on it. I set up my paint sprayer and went ahead and sprayed a coat of primer. I find that once the first coat of primer is on, it is a lot easier to see defects and holes in the wood that need to be filled. So I took care of that, gave the entire piece a light sand, wiped off all the dust really well, and then added another coat of primer, followed by 2 coats of paint. Then I peeled off the tape, which is my favorite part of painting projects. Next, I went ahead and cleaned up any glue residue on the walnut plywood and gave it a coat of finishing oil to bring out that beautiful walnut grain. The cabinet came alive with the gorgeous walnut interior paired with the white exterior. Now the legs. These are made from 2x4 boards. I simply ripped off the rounded edges on the table saw, cut to length and made pocket holes. Yes, I'm using the older K4 because this was built many months ago during the first round of the project. The details to build this are in the plans as well. The pocket holes in the legs were a little hard to get to, but my right angle drill adapter was a lifesaver. For the doors, I cut down the remaining walnut plywood to size, making sure that the grain across the 2 doors was continuous. I applied edge banding and finished the edges. Then I made the holes for the concealed slow close hinges and installed them. To help open and close the doors, I added magnetic push latches. I went ahead and attached the backs with finished nails, and I made larger holes to help with the cords. Finally, the speaker front covers. These are made from 1x2 boards and are slightly smaller than the ones I built earlier for the speaker compartment. I joined these using pocket holes. I could have glued them up like earlier, but I didn't want to wait overnight and these would be hidden anyways. I stained the entire frame black to blend in with the black speaker fabric and made holes for the magnets in the middle of the frames. This time the hole is going to be just deep enough to hold the magnet so it is flush to the top. You do want to also check the orientation of the magnets before you attach them. For the speaker covers, I am using acoustically transparent fabric, which I stretched and stapled to the speaker frame. For the corners, you do want to fold the fabric in sections so that it isn't very thick around the corners. Also fold and tuck all the fabric into the frame for a finished look. And that is the speaker frame. Isn't the magnet super cool? Finally, I aligned and attached the legs to the base using wood glue and pocket hole screws. Yes, there are 2 different sets of pocket holes on there because I used 2.5-inch drill setting, but I actually needed a 3/4-inch setting because we are attaching to the thinner material. And that is it. This is now my favorite project to date, not just because of how it turned out, but because of all the literal blood, sweat, and tears that went into making it happen. I hope you love it as much as I do, and if you would like to build this, I do have the step-by-step plans for you linked in the description. If you aren't already, please subscribe so you don't miss out any future projects. And now, here are a few other furniture projects you might enjoy.